let's do that. Okay, so Mr. Cooper, did you want to say something before Mr. Burrell started with his report, or?
I was going to say there's a lot of interest in this matter. There are a lot of moving parts, and it has been a theme that's come through politically quite strongly. However, I suppose the political language doesn't necessarily translate to planning language, as we know, and it's rare that you get a yes/no answer from a planner. It's always, it depends. And that's basically, if I was going to summarise this report, I'd say that's the answer. It depends. So in that context, I'll hand over to District Planning Manager Mr. Hamish Burrell.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I think we talked just earlier about alignment in some context, and I think this report is interesting, and in terms of public, in terms of planning, which is often a rare thing, but it is an interesting topic of conversation, and the reason being is that it's not just about the district plan. I mean, obviously this will have consequences through other council processes as well, should we, depending upon what the decision ultimately is on this. There sounds like there's lots of questions, so we'll cut to the chase and get to those. But what I would say at the outset is 3 or 4 points. There isn't, despite looking in obvious sort of low risk through national policy as we see it, and we have looked extensively at what council could do or should do. The main route through is via the highly productive land, and there are some clauses there which I've outlined in paragraph 16, which we need to be aware of. I think those are the most relevant ones, but it's possible that there's other regional policy as well, which is important. In discussions we've had, there is a difference in expectation between infrastructure provision, what council might want to provide, and what the private sector may want to provide. And I think that's really quite an important point, because we can talk about highly productive land, and look, that might change, it might not. But ultimately, this is an out-of-sequence development, and there are real cost implications ultimately in terms of the expectation. If we zone it rather than the private sector, then the onus is more on us to provide. And I've got Kevin in the background who may be able to help clarify some matters on that account. And just, I guess, the way it's been sort of put to me in terms of a proposal for housing, there's a lot of talk about affordability. And affordability is definitely a good thing. So what I would say is that option, and I haven't really outlined this in the report, but if option 1 is preferred, then it would be useful to seek some form of assurance around both the deliverability and affordability of this proposal. And without further ado, it's over to questions, I guess.
Okay, so Mr. Cooper has just suggested that we just hear quickly from Michael Garbutt on the risk to the proposed district plan process, because I'm aware that that's a massive amount of work that council is undertaking, and putting that at jeopardy is a concern, and we just need to understand that. If you don't mind, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing I really comment on in the paper, paras 12, Roman 2 and Roman 6, are the bits that I added to the report. So paragraph 12.2, risk to the proposed plan process. Really, what we were just alerting you to there is that clearly you're well aware council is notified of full district plan review, and that's at submission stage and hasn't yet moved to hearing stage. If you do work up a variation and then get to the stage of notifying it, it will obviously amend provisions that are out there for submission at the moment, and it will add complexity, and whatever's varied will have to probably go on hold pending the variation to allow it to catch up and to sort of be heard together with the previous provisions, which would be substituted out. So it doesn't affect the whole district plan at all. By no means am I saying that, but any provisions around this site or relevant rules or other things that are altered by the variation would get held up to allow the variation to catch up. The only other thing I really wanted to say in terms of outcome, obviously variations kick off a public process and they need to be weighed up with all the public submissions, all the higher order documents, and just because council notify a variation doesn't mean it's going to be successful. So, you know, it's one of those elements of doing the right work, getting the right evidence to support a variation if you wish to proceed down that path, and then notifying it, and at that point it's subject to submissions, hearing and potential appeal. So those are the main risks from a legal point of view. It's really around the process and some of those risks around whether it's actually successful or not, which you won't really know until it goes through the process. So that's what I wanted to say. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you. So I'll just take questions from Michael. Yes, Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Michael. Councillor Scott, just with regards to that process around the district plan, I'm not sure at what part this chapter, say, of subdivisions is in our hearing schedule. I think it's quite a while off, but the risk is to the developer rather than to TDC, isn't it? Because the risk around whether they go through the proposal, the hearing process, the submissions for and against, so the risk is on them rather than to the district plan process. Is that what it's sort of a catch-22?
There's probably different layers of risk there. So if council promote a variation, that is council's variation. So you as the council would be the promoter of that change, and you'd have to be calling evidence and trying to have it approved. Ultimately, though, you're right that if council's successful, then that benefits the landowners, clearly. If council's unsuccessful, then that's probably seen to the disadvantage of landowners. But council will bear the process cost of promoting and advocating for the variation as you go through the process.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions for Michael before I open up to questions of the council officers? No, thank you. So I'm wondering, Councillor Scott, if I leave you towards the end, because somebody else might ask some of your questions other than having a big long list. So is there any other questions that anyone has? Not of the lawyer, of Hamish Burrell and the council planners and officers. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, thanks. I see you've got risks here in 12. Now, whereabouts are your benefits in the report?
Mr. Cooper, do you want to answer that?
Through you, Madam Chair. This report is brought to you to make the governing body aware of what we need to establish in order to be successful in the proposed variation. The economic benefits that may or may not exist from this would likely be some of the evidence that you produce to go towards that hearing. We don't have the information. you may get 100, 400, whatever the number is. You may get more rate takes, or you may get more rate payers, but you don't increase your revenue because the pie is still the pie. You just split the pie differently. So the economic benefits we'd have to go to an economist and have them do an assessment and come back to us with evidence based on data and projections on that data, like we did for the growth management strategy. And it's that would inform what you're asking for. So we don't have that information, is what I'm saying. We don't have anything. And we have to build that body of evidence for this variation to succeed.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up? Otherwise I'll go to Mayor Bowen. Oh, we'll go to Mayor Bowen.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Just on the theme of risk, and just interested to know if to the point made, it's our variation. So where does the cost lie in regard to provision of infrastructure in planning in general? Just interested, to understand the cost issue.
Just to try and clarify that, I don't think there's a strict liability, but the general expectation is if you're zoning land, then you would provide the infrastructure to make it work, and there will have to be presumably some give and take. And I mean, obviously, I've had a couple of discussions, and I note that there is sort of like a bit of a gap there in terms of what we've got. I think I might just let Kevin describe sort of in terms of the funding base that we have at the moment towards infrastructure and what that would entail from our point of view.
Yeah, no problem. Kevin Kemp, infrastructure planner. So our current funding is primarily from rates, right? So we don't have any sort of a development contribution policy. We do use financial contributions when they, when they best suit. So potentially when things have been designed or we have plans for new infrastructure to go in, sometimes we do use financial contributions in that case. But in this instance, we don't have anything designed yet, so it would be potentially working strictly off rates at this point. If we had development contribution policy, we could have been collecting funds over since 2002, since you were allowed to set those up, and we'd have a bucket filled so that we could fund growth and fund new infrastructure to service growth, but we do not have that policy in place. So at this point, it would just be rates or potentially financial contributions that we recover from the developers whenever they do their works as part of their resource consent, as part of their subdivision consents.
So we would be expected to get the infrastructure up there, more or less. Wouldn't that be right? And
if we were to lead the variation process, that would be that's generally the expectation.
And they would provide the infrastructure within the actual development itself. So again, this is why this is of interest, quite an interesting piece, because it has, in terms of alignment of process, sort of a broad effect across different areas of council.
Mr Dixon, I see you've come to the table. Did you want to add to that?
I think just to give a bit of clarity around this, our normal process is that the developer pays for the infrastructure within the development, and then there is provision in our district plan for financial contributions beyond that. I agree, there is an expectation that generally those services are available to the boundary, but not always. If you take Bruffs Gully for example, we did a lot of work in regard to planning the infrastructure there. We have a development area plan and we have financial contributions. It's set in and among that development. So when people develop, there is a bit of contributions for land, for roading, etc. that come through to help fund that. We have done similar examples up in Glenettie where we've installed truck sewers, truck water mains, and there is again financial contributions policies in place for those areas. So that all has to be done up front before this land is actually developed and will be part of a development area plan process. But Otherwise, council would have to take basically loan fund or rates fund the actual infrastructure.
So the intention behind the current plan is notified is that it's a FDA, so it's a future development area direction of travel. The onus or thought at the time of notification was that it would be private developer led to actually make this happen in these areas.
Just on that note, I may have misunderstood that, but with the future development area, does that exempt us from the highly productive land status or not? Are you able to comment on how those two things work together?
Yes, I can, and it's a fairly complicated question, and I'm more than happy for Michael to jump in. But to coin Mr. Cooper's phrase, it doesn't. With this particular FDA, future development area, for the most part, it doesn't where it relates to rurally zoned land. And the reason is because at the time of notification, we believed it was unlikely to come forward for more than, say, 10 years. And so the highly productive land says that in that instance it applies, and that's the reason why I've set out the pathway through. There is some land there which is currently zoned operative under the operative plan as open space, and the highly productive land does not apply to that because under the transitional arrangements in the document it's got a so-called urban zoning.
Oh, thank you. Let's go, Councillor Scott. I see you bursting.
No, I actually probably just wanted to ask a question to that though. So I wonder whether there's an opportunity, and we've just reshaped the question a little bit around if we were to approve the investigation to this possible variation, maybe for the councillors to understand what does that actually mean. So for example, Andrew's talking about his infrastructure that would need to connect, but there's a lot of economic assessment, as you said, to be done, and it may become an unviable option for everybody. And so I feel like today we're jumping ahead and we're building all these houses. We're not. We want to continue to investigate this proposal. So I suppose I would like to hear from Hamish and Andrew, what actually is the next steps? What actually happens after today if this Greenfield proposal, we ask for it to go to the next level? I'd like to know around what happens and the timeframes to that, because I think that is important for the proposed district plan too.
So from my perspective, what would have to happen is that, in the event that councillors wished us to proceed at pace on this, we'd probably ask a little bit of caution in terms of the impact of this on the proposed plan, because I think, as Michael's alluded to already, there, and what I can reinforce is there are some real practical implications around going forward the variation at this time. But notwithstanding that, if we were to proceed, then we would have to prepare what's called Section 32 reports, and we would have to commission consultants. We would have to have a wide range of different areas. We would probably have to look at economics. We would probably have to look at the agricultural carrying capacity. We would probably have to look at natural hazards. We would probably have to look at all of those things which probably fall under the risk that's been alluded to there, climate change, and so on. Once you've got that suite of documents and we believe that it can pass through the national direction that I've outlined, then we would come back to council for approval, and then it would be notified. there would be a call for submissions, further submissions, just like we've experienced through the proposed plan to date, and that would then go to a hearing. It could be that it can be circumvented back into the hearing process, but just on that, we are coming up to that milestone of, well, it's not too far down the track of the second year, so we are going to have to go to the ministry and say almost certainly that we'll need to extend the proposed plan hearings, which will move it forward. From talking to ministry officials, we'll have to have quite a detailed project plan around how much of an impact that is, and potentially consult with affected parties if effectively this results in a delay to the district plan process.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, just from an infrastructure perspective, we need to assess the capacity of the existing infrastructure. We'd probably need to do a development area plan in regards to that, to look at, how this area can be serviced in the long term. Yeah, potentially, you're looking at around $500,000, which is operating expenditure, which is unbudgeted expenditure at this stage. And part of that, we would also develop the financial contributions policy for the actual installation of the infrastructure at the time.
And Councillor Paddington, sorry, I'll just go to Councillor Paddington and come back to you, Councillor.
I note all that, Hamish and Andrew, but it's a bit of risk and reward as a council. We're going to get more ratepayers, we're going to grow the economy and grow the district. What you've both described to me is what I thought council officers did. So we're not really asking you guys to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I just think we need to look at this, and as Councillor Scott has pointed out, we're not doing it, but we'll be in a better spot if we agree to this, to know all the steps and what it will deliver to the Timaru district, really. And, you touched on costs, Andrew. We often borrow to do these things that fall on our plate or don't, I'm sure finance isn't going to be a problem. I just think as a council, we've got a proposal that we should at least test it in some way. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, normally, what I would say is that we are proceeding with, in accordance with the proposed district plan. So we have here basically development areas 1 and 2, which is along Pages Road and down Callens Hill. And they're the first development area plans that we're preparing. So we are doing that, and that is budgeted now. What this other land you're talking about is out of sequence, effectively. So we haven't budgeted for that. We haven't planned to do that at this stage. So it's that side of thing. And you also got to weigh up public-private benefit. Yeah, normally what plan changes are done by private developers and not the council.
I'll just go back to you, Councillor Paddington, and then Councillor Booth and Councillor Scott, I think.
Yeah, I understand it's out of sequence, but there are, Venture Timaru, we have a number of other parties have come and said we need flat, slightly cheaper land, which is something we can test. And if we can deliver that, the land you're talking about, Andrew, will either be really expensive sections or on a slope that will need individuals to put infrastructure so they can build the house on. So that's not really delivering in some ways what we want. I mean, I always find it great. We get out-of-town consultants that tell us College Road will be great, the bottom of Kanua Road, and they're just not, or else people would have built on them years ago. So here you have someone with the firepower to do something, is proposing it. I don't see why we wouldn't be at least testing it.
Thank you, Councillor Paddington. Councillor Booth, did you have another question?
Yeah, I guess I have. The GMS, which Growth Management Strategy, which you refer to, says it identifies we already have 130 hectares within our town boundary, which is ready to be. And some of it's been sitting there since 1988, and there's probably a good reason for that, why it's been sitting, because it's unsuitable. And so I don't know why that was still included in that growth management strategy when it was delivered. It should have been taken out. Everything you've also mentioned, it talks about Mahoney's Hill and some of the new areas. They're all on a hill, and they are all not $250,000 sections. So they're all 500,000 plus. So if when you're talking about College Road, O'Neill's Place, and Redruth, for goodness sake, as being included in our growth management strategy, no wonder we're a retirement home. So we need to change the settings here, guys, and that's what we need you to do. We're making it quite clear there needs to be another. We're missing the bottom rung in our build strategy for people to get onto the property ladder and build something and achieve that dream here in South Canterbury. So that's a worry for me. And unless we do something drastic to change, and this is an opportunity, and at the end of the day, we sit around this table and we vote and we move it forward, we can do that, regardless of all those reports. So it's only going to be the people that come saying, oh, you can't do that, such as Environment Canterbury and such as Waka Kotahi. We can change the settings here around this table. Here's an opportunity. I question the suggestion it's going to cost the ratepayer, infrastructure. The developer is responsible for connecting to our services. So we already have the services. The services are out there. I asked you, Andrew, the other day, are they fully utilised or is there plenty spare capacity? There was plenty of capacity, were your words. So it helps mitigate the costs that in all our investments if we allow more properties to be developed at the developer's cost. We will be up for running the My Way bus another couple of kilometres out to that area. But actually, if you think forward to the future, 100 years, where do you think Timaru's going to go? It's not going to be climbing up around the mountains here. It's going to be going out towards in that triangle between Temuka.
Councillor Booth, did you have a question?
Yeah.
So I appreciate your comments, but I'm conscious that this meeting always
Okay,
takes a long time.
well, take that land out I just mentioned. We're short by about 600 houses.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm conscious of time. Mayor, oh no, sorry, I promised Councillor Scott, and then we'll come back to Mayor Bowen.
I didn't really want to follow on from Alan, actually. I was actually just going back to, and I appreciate that you gave the sort of the overview of what the next steps would look like. And I think if we're trying to find a positive in this, Hamish, around the proposed district plan, was that if we did time it right, because the extension has nothing to do with what's on the table today, our current extension that we need to put in for our hearings, the capability to circulate that back into the hearing schedule as a positive, I see, if we're looking for one. So I think that that's a really good thing if we're talking about the proposed district plan process. So I think if we're trying to find a real positive around our proposed district plan, that this could be circulated back in at the right time, which I think is good. So for me, I think that's a real positive. Just following on from Alan, but in a gentler manner, I think, we do sit here at this table and we have a vision of the 75,000 by 2050, which is being highly promoted by Venture Timaru. And I think there is an opportunity to start to look at how we do this. And so when we're provided with an opportunity like this or a proposal, I really appreciate the investigations that we will need to do, and I know the pressures that we'll put on resourcing to do that. But I think we'd be negligent as well not to look at how we can make this work. So I do appreciate the pressures that it will put on, and I'm acknowledging that. But when you get presented with this for an opportunity that we're with our vision, I think, it's a really interesting conversation to be having. So I do appreciate the work that you've brought to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Mr. Cooper just wants to comment on that.
Yeah, just for clarity, Councillor Scott, we don't have any resource in-house for this because we are delivering the district plan. So it would be delivered by consultants, and it would be a management exercise of that. So I think, although it might present extra work, it's manageable. Yeah.
Mayor Bowen.
Look, thank you. In the interest of moving this on, and I think that Councillor Booth's speech is probably going to go down in history with Martin Luther King's here. Add a few to the quote book, but look, I'd like to move that we do continue to investigate. So I'd like to move option 1.
Thank you, Mayor Bowen. Councillor Burt, just before I ask for a seconder, did you have one last comment to make?
Yeah, well, in fairness to our staff, when we ask them to do things, sometimes we come to this table and we have issues around debt and we have issues around borrowings and everything, and then we suddenly cut our cloth to decide that it's not a big deal. And we also ask for complete papers with warts and all, everything. So that's everything in. And then it's up to us to decide whether it's relevant or not. And so that's what they're doing. And we need to know and understand that before we turn around and say, I don't think that's relevant, don't include it in the future. So, let's think about what we say to our staff and understand that. I'm not sure what the angst is. This is this is an opportunity, and we either decide as a team or a group or as councillors that we need to further it. Let's just get on and make those decisions. One of the things I just saw in the risk, and I just want to ask, is it a big risk, and in what level it is the area that we're talking about is a flood assessment area. And in terms of affordability, we all know that in terms of that can have massive implications on how you build a house and what that looks like and the platforms that you do and foundations and everything. So in terms of affordability, it's a quick question, but I know it'll be also incorporated in our assessment overall that you would give to us. Can you just comment just on that?
Look, my understanding is that it would be presumably manageable on site. There would be sort of floor height requirements that would address that, but in terms of anything that might be needed over and above that, I couldn't really comment.
If I could just comment further on that, that's something part of the assessment that we'd have to do, and I think it's important to note that the assumption is that flat land is cheap to develop. That's not necessarily the case. Flat land, like with sewers, you need gravity for it to flow. Water flows downhill. Flat land doesn't have that fall, so you're then probably going to need a pumping station in there. There's probably about $700 million perhaps for a pumping station. Yeah. Yeah. So, there are, and then of course, flat land also floods. And so you need to look at the floor height. So, the assumption is that flat land is cheap to develop is not necessarily correct at times. So that's part of our investigation that we do.
Okay, so, sorry, Councillor.
I've got no problem seconding that motion.
Thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder of option 1, but I'm just conscious that not all councillors have had a chance to ask questions. So if there's any other burning questions that or opposing views to option 1, I'll get you to make a comment, Mayor Bowen, and then I think Councillor Shannon may have had a question.
No, I'm conscious and just be aware that we're moving here an investigation. This will trigger conversations around Jordan, Temuka, and elsewhere. So just be ready for it.
Councillor Shannon.
Yeah, that's funny, Mayor Bowen, you read my mind.
Read mine too.
Yeah. I'm just really interested in seeing the information that comes back in terms of, and I'm very keen to see also all of the proposed economic benefits, including those coming from VT, because with respect, all I have seen so far, being new to the table, is a lot of aspiration and ambition, which I'm all across, but I've also come into a council that's really looking hard at how we're going to cut our cloth. So looking forward to those figures, and likewise VT, I'm still waiting for that data that Mayor Bowen asked for some time ago.
Thank you. And councillor Paddington one last comment, and then I see Mr.
No,
Burrell.
just it's a question. So what sort of time frame are we setting around this? That's what I want to know, because we say, yes, let's do it. I want to know from Paul what would be a reasonable time frame we could set.
Can we just discuss it, because I'm also keen to understand exactly what we're asking for and what work we're instructing council officers to do. I'll just come back to that. Mr. Burrell, did you have one last comment, or?
Look, when it comes to the planning process and going forward, it does come back entirely to what evidence you've got. And so far we haven't been furnished with much. We may even be going counter to our own evidence. It does require that sort of process to get this through. I'd just like to reiterate one of my points, which is if option one is preferred, then it would be useful to seek some form of reassurance around deliverability and affordability of this site. So going back to that, is flat land the cheap option that we are assuming?
Mine, on Councillor Bennington's question, so the DAP that we're working on, that we're progressing right now for FDAs 1 and 2, just the tentative timeframes we're looking at are hopefully May to have a development area plan for you guys to approve, for you all to approve as a team. And then from there, that would be the process of doing the plan change, the variation, or whichever, plan change process, which that can take a year plus, depending on appeals and all those kind of things that could happen with it. So you're looking at 2 years, at least.
Thank you. So just before I put the motion that's been moved and seconded, I just want to be clear about what we're asking council officers to do, because obviously this is going to come at a lot of cost. And are we asking them to go away and prepare the Section 32A reports, or are we just asking them to come back with a plan of this is how much it'll cost to do all the work that's needed, and this is the plan and the time frame? Because in my mind it's the second option, but I just want to make sure that's what the intent of the resolution is. Mayor Bowen, did you just want to comment?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a combination, to be fair, because we do want to put the hammer down. So I'm conscious that, the time to do the work, to understand, is possibly going to add to the 2-year time frame as well. So, look, if I look at the issues in town around housing, it'd be great to be able to have a response within a 2-year period, because, this is frustrating. So I think we need to, push go on this. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
It's effectively push and go, on spending
On the cost.
unbudgeted money on the cost.
Look, I think the cost, with the expertise we've got in council, they'll be able to wrap some indicative numbers around that pretty quickly, I would have thought, to a lower and a higher level as far as risk. Andrew, just a nod would be helpful.
In doing a development area plan, for instance, we will need to outsource that to consultants. We of course have already proceeded on using FD1 and FD2 and the proposed district plans, so we can get some numbers around that, no problem. And then we can look at the modelling side of other flood side of things. We can get some numbers around that. Yes, we can certainly provide you some costs and some time frames, but as far as the infrastructure costs are concerned, that's the next stage.
It's got that in there, Councillor Pye, around that working towards option 1 is currently unbudgeted expenditure, and if the preferred option, officers would look to be reporting back on the likely cost and rates impact. So it's actually in that option.
Well, thank you. I was just looking at the summary one at the very top of the report. Thank you for that. So we have the motion on the floor and seconded, so I will put that motion in.
Sorry, just before you-
Councillor Paddington.
Sorry, just for clarity, we're talking about both those areas, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes,
it's
yes,
just
but
investigate both of
investigate
them.
both those
Correct.
areas. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. But sorry, just for
Okay, so I'll put. Sorry, yes, councillor Booth.
Who are who are those reports for the benefit of? Are they actually for the benefit of us to make an informed decision?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Booth, if you're talking about the reports that inform the Section 32 report, those reports are typically specialist reports. So there might be a transport report, all that stuff. There might be 8. If you look at AHOKA, I think they've got about 10 planning specialists that have had input. And each of those might be, I don't know, 20, 30K. It depends on what they are. So that's indicative. What are you asking me?
I'm asking who is the benefit of those reports for?
The benefit of those specialist reports, they're for the benefit of the panel that hears the hearings and listens to submissions.
And that panel then make a recommendation to the council, which we would then ratify. Is that correct?
Look, they're for the benefit of everybody, because all submitters have got to make an informed choice on this. Once the reports are there, I mean, it's for the benefit of anybody who engages in this process, because once you go out once you notify it, you legally are required to have the reports there, are publicly available, so people can make informed decisions on them, and they will inform submissions. And ultimately, there'll be further reports that will go to the panel, whoever hears this, which may have to respond to submission points and then develop those Section 32 reports further.
And ultimately, then they come back to us to be actually ratified, as in the recommendation from the Commissioner.
Yes. Well, if it's to be adopted, that's ultimately right. Yes.
Cool, okay, I'm gonna ask, we've got the motion and seconder, so all in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against? Motion carried, thank you very much. And thank you everyone's patience and input into that. I think I've just got one more. No, I don't need to move us back out of public excluded because we're not in there, so I will close the meeting at 11:22, longest one again, thank you.